Hi, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Today we're going to be looking at a Veritasium video on the most radioactive places on Earth. Let's check it out. Chernobyl's an obvious choice. That is a really annoying noise for a Geiger counter, just detecting radiation. Usually they're more of a clicking ones, at least the ones I had at the nuclear plant. But this one's a bit more high pitched. It's to really get your attention, I'm sure. Oh man. Overload? It says overload? Oh, that's crazy.
Radiation is frightening. At least certain types of it are. I mean, my Geiger counter doesn't go off near my mobile phone or the Wi-Fi router or my microwave. That's because a Geiger counter only measures ionizing radiation. That is, radiation with enough energy to rip electrons off atoms.
Yeah, a Geiger counter is just a form of ionization chamber, so it literally only counts ionizing incidents. And it's actually a very sensitive one just because it lets you know right when there's radiation, and all it really does is tell you that radiation is there. It doesn't really tell you the difference between the type of radiation, because whether it's an alpha particle, a beta, or a gamma, each one is going to cause a complete amount of ionization within the actual chamber at work. So it's going to register every count the same. And the units are typically in counts per minute, counts per second, that sort of thing.
And it's measured in units called sieverts. If you're exposed to more than 2 sieverts all at once, you'll probably die shortly after that. Interesting,
his is in sieverts. So his Geiger counter must do a little bit of math involved. So sieverts is a unit of dose equivalent. So let's back up and go to absorbed dose. The units of that are rads, which you've probably, if you're familiar with the video game series Fallout, you're probably used to seeing if you've played those sort of games. A rad's a fairly large unit. 100 rads is a gray, which is an even bigger unit. And then you multiply a gray by something called a quality factor to get sieverts. And the quality factor takes into account the effect of the type of radiation, whether it's gamma, a neutron, or alpha, or what have you, and turns that into what kind of effect it has on the person. So for gamma, it's 1-to-1, so 1 gray is 1 sievert. And he's right that a sievert's a really, really big unit. The number that used to hearing for almost certain death is 1,000 rem. A rem is a rad multiplied by a quality factor. So 1,000 of that, and he's talking about 2 sieverts is 200 of that. That's going to increase your chance of dying a lot. It's possible to survive that. 10 sieverts, almost guaranteed. Once you get into like the 400 range, unless you have prompt medical care right away, you're probably not going to make it. And when you get into 6 sieverts, even with amazing unprompt medical treatment, you're still probably going to die within 60 days. You have about a 50% chance.
But we're exposed to low levels of ionizing radiation all the time. Bananas, for example, are rich in potassium, and some of that potassium is naturally radioactive.
Yeah, it is.
So when you eat a banana, you're actually exposed to about 0.1 microsieverts of radiation. That's 1/10,000,000th of a sievert.
There is a unit, the banana effective dose, or banana equivalent dose, which is 0.1 microsieverts, like you just said.
Let's use a banana for scale of radiation doses. You know, since people eat bananas, we become radioactive too. So you're actually exposed to more radiation if you sleep next to someone than if you sleep alone.
That is absolutely right. I talk about this in a few of my videos. So this is 0.05 for one night. I think the number that I've used is 10 for 1 year consistently. So it depends on a few things. Depends how cuddly you are with your partners. I would get a lot of dose from that.
But I wouldn't worry about that, because that dose is insignificant compared to the natural background radiation of Earth. I mean, there's ionizing radiation coming out of the soil and the rocks and the air and even from space. The level of radiation here in Sydney is about 0.15 microsieverts per hour. And that's about average globally. The level's usually between 0.1 and 0.2 microsieverts per hour. But there are places with significantly higher levels. So who on Earth do you think receives the maximum dose of ionizing radiation?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I was gonna say astronauts, but they're not on Earth, so... Like an occupation, maybe miners. All that radon from being in mines, you're probably gonna get some of that from just a regular occupation. I'm not counting accidents like Chernobyl, or criticality accidents where someone is right next to the source and got a massive amount of neutron dose. Neutrons, I mentioned quality factor earlier, depending on the energy, can be anything from ×5 to ×10. So that is probably the highest recorded, would be someone with a criticality accident where they were right on top of moving spheres together, such as the Demon Core. But I don't think the Demon Core was actually the highest, but there were a lot of crazy experiments like that back in the 40s and 50s. And that would probably be the highest dose. But as far as an occupation, an Earth occupation, I'm going to go with miners.
Let's answer that question by going to the most radioactive places on Earth. Some places you'd expect to have high levels of radiation might surprise you. I'm in Hiroshima, and that is the Peace Dome. It was about 600 meters above that dome where the world's first nuclear bomb was detonated over a city. It was detonated there to have maximum destructive impact. With a level of radiation today, almost 70 years later, is only 0.3 microsieverts per hour.
And the reason why it's so small, one, it's been a while, and two, it was an airburst detonation. He mentioned maximized destructive capability. That's true. It caused a massive pressure shockwave blast fireball that did a lot of damage. But that's actually going to minimize the amount of contamination to the surface and therefore the effective dose from the surface after the attack. Yes, people still got horrific radiation sickness, but not as much as it would have been if it was a detonation on the ground.
I'm about to get into an elevator. We're going down the mine shaft. This is an old uranium mine.
Oh, uranium mine, cool.
This is the mine where uranium was discovered.
I do appreciate this guy for traveling all over the world for this project. That is really cool.
It's also the place where Marie Curie obtained her raw material.
Cool.
1.7 microsieverts per hour. It's about 10 times the natural background that you would have.
You get dosed down in
Nowadays,
mines.
most of the uranium has been removed. But in this wall, there's still a small piece, and you can see under UV light, it fluoresces.
Look at that. Fluorescent uranium ore.
Now, you would get elevated dose in a different type of mine, not necessarily just uranium mines. In uranium mines, I'd imagine it's going to be more. But radon exists in the ground. Even if you're not mining uranium, there's going to be some uranium there. And the radon gas is where you're getting your dose from. Uranium as an alpha source, only if you ingest it or inhale it does it really become a hazard. As far as a radiation hazard, it would also be just you're inhaling a heavy metal. You don't want to get that kind of poisoning either.
This is the lab of Marie Curie.
Oh, wow.
She won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry. And she conducted a lot of her work here. And this is her office. She would have sat right there. Apparently there are only a few parts of this area which are still radioactive. One is this doorknob.
Well, it climbs not much,
But that's like 10 times the background.
yes. More than 10.
And because she touched all the radium, she used that doorknob a lot. That's wow. That's fascinating.
Is the back of her chair. You can still
'Cause she would touch it.
particles coming off this spot right here. Apparently, after she was working in the lab, she would come, open the door, leaving traces of radium
That's
here,
fascinating.
and then go and pull out her chair.
Because this was well over 100 years ago, and those are probably the hot spots. I mean, there's probably a little bit of dose on, like, just say, like the middle of her desk or something. But yeah, it's fascinating how it's that particle discrete dose from just the knob and the chair.
Welcome to New Mexico. This
Okay, the Trinity
is
site,
the
I'm
Trinity
sure.
bomb
Yep.
test site where the world's first nuclear bomb was set off. Right here, right in this spot. This whole area was vaporized. In fact, there was so much heat liberated by that bomb that it fused all of the desert sand into this green glass. And you can still find it here.
That's just
They've
fascinating.
actually named this mineral after the test. It's called Trinitite. Yeah, this is the only place on Earth that this has ever been made. The level of radiation here is about 0.8 microsieverts an hour. The Trinitite itself is a little bit more radioactive. I got readings of 2 or 3 microsieverts an hour off them.
That's not surprising at all. So some of it is just the detector itself, the detection window. You get something right next to it, it's going to read a good bit higher because it's actually unidirectional is how those sort of detectors work. And another thing, it's the inverse square law. You double your distance from a source, the amount of dose drops off by a factor of 4. So that's not an unsurprising result to me.
Now, which place has higher levels of radiation than anywhere we've seen so far? The answer is an airplane.
Yes.
You know, as you
'Cause
gain altitude,
you're higher in the
there's
atmosphere.
less atmosphere above you to shield you from cosmic rays. So the level of radiation inside the plane can go up to 0.5 microsieverts per hour at 18,000 feet, up to 1 microsievert per hour at 23,000 feet, over 2 microsieverts per hour at 33,000 feet, and over 3 microsieverts per hour at even higher altitudes and towards the poles.
I'm surprised they let him bring that thing on the plane and just wondering what the guy sitting next to him is like, what are you doing? This little device that beeps and being on a plane and everything. I'm kind of surprised they let him do that.
That is Chernobyl nuclear reactor number 4.
Infamous site.
It melted down on April 26, 1986. So what happened was so much heat was generated inside that reactor that it basically blew the top off, spreading radioactive isotopes throughout this whole surrounding area and over into Europe. And that is why we can still detect the contamination here today.
If you want to hear me talk more about Chernobyl, highly recommend you check out my reaction to HBO's Chernobyl series. But yeah, right there, not a bad summary of what happened. Crazy test, bad design, worse operators, completely just destroyed the core, blew the roof off the building, spread radioactive particles everywhere. Worst nuclear accident in history by a lot.
Now right now it's reading around 5 microsieverts an hour. If I stayed here for 1 hour, my body would receive a similar dose to what you'd receive when you get a dental x-ray. So this is
That's really not that
a
much.
huge amount of radiation. And one of the reasons why the radiation level is not too high is because they actually removed a couple meters worth of topsoil from this whole area. Then they dumped it somewhere. That's why we can stand here.
True.
We're driving into the Fukushima exclusion zone now. I'm just watching as the levels on my Geiger counter go up as we approach the zone. See those black bags at the side of the road? The Japanese are doing now exactly what the people in Chernobyl did.
Oh, this video is 8 years old. Okay, so 2015, accident happened in 2011. Yes, okay, that work was still ongoing at this time period. A lot of that's done. In fact, the exclusion zone now is smaller than what it was as recent as last year, 2022. There have been towns, areas that have been opened up to people returning to there because more cleanup has been done and more things have decayed away since then. But it's interesting that this video is a few years old, so yeah, you would see some of that.
Collecting up meters and meters of topsoil.
The mask.
The mask is probably overkill.
So interesting point about using masks, respirators. When going into a radiological controlled area and you get briefed by your radiation protection technicians, they do a little bit of consideration depending on what the hazards are in the area. So what the respirators are done is specifically to minimize inhalation of radioisotopes and then taking internal dose. This is particularly effective at reducing dose from alpha particles, since while alpha particles will not even penetrate your skin, internally they're going to cause a lot more close range damage to the DNA strands within your cells. So that is a particular hazard, and that is a good PPE to mitigate that hazard. However, consideration does need to be taken place for respirators in general. It's not always safer. This particular respirator is pretty easy. He's not wearing like a bulky SCBA or bubble hood or anything exotic for this particular area. And he wouldn't if they're for just going into the Fukushima exclusion zone, even back then. That doesn't always make the job safer, because part of it is you just take into account how long you're going to be there. So if the job so let's say the respirator reduces your dose by a factor of 2, but if it takes you 3 times longer to do the job because of the added bulk, when the respirator actually is less safer. So this is all task and situationally dependent on what sort of PPE you need for the job, just like with anything else, but just thought I'd share that.
It's just to stop radioactive dust from getting into my lungs.
Yep.
This is definitely one of the most radioactive places where I've been. Even though the release of radioactive material was less than Chernobyl, only about 10%. Because it's much fresher, only 3 years since the accident, much less of it has decayed.
So 10%, that figure is correct in terms of how many becquerels, curies of radioisotopes were released. Fukushima is about 1/10 of Chernobyl, but Chernobyl was way more than 10 times worse than Fukushima in terms of deaths, impacts to humanity. Fukushima, there was only one recorded death associated with the nuclear stuff. Not counting the earthquake and tsunami, 20,000 people died from that, but that was just a horrific natural disaster. But a lot of the radioisotopes went into the Pacific Ocean, and this was all just based on location of where the Fukushima nuclear power plant was versus where Chernobyl was in the middle of a landlocked portion of Eastern Europe. So that's part of the reason. And going into the water, the Pacific Ocean is vast. It's a high energy environment with constantly stirring the water of everything that would spill in, so it gets diluted pretty quick. That's one of the reasons. There were several, but one of the reasons why the impact from Fukushima nowhere nearly as bad as Chernobyl. Chernobyl was just so much worse.
So I've been getting readings up around 5 to 10 microsieverts an hour, and I think we won't be staying here for too long because of that. I'm about to go
microsieverts.
into the hospital at Pripyat.
1 hour at Fukushima in 2015, equivalent to a year of cuddling in anywhere else. Pripyat Hospital.
This is where the firemen were taken after they fought the fires at the Chernobyl reactor. And in the basement of this building, they have left all of the firemen's clothing. Once they realized it was so contaminated, they chucked it down there.
That type of respirator right there is has a bigger filter on it that's going to filter out more radioisotopes. It's a lot.
That here? 80.
Look at all those bananas.
You can see there's a huge pile of that gear there.
A lot of those firefighters succumbed to acute radiation poisoning and died in one of the most horrific ways.
Right outside the door, I'm getting 500 microsieverts an hour just outside the door.
So many bananas.
1,500 microsieverts an hour. You know, if we stayed here for a couple hours, we'd receive our annual dose of background radiation.
Yep.
That basement was the most radioactive place I visited, and it's one of the most radioactive places on Earth. If I'd stayed down there for 1 hour, I would have received 2,000 microsieverts. That's a year's worth of natural background radiation.
So there are more radioactive spots. The actual Chernobyl reactor inside the building with the elephant's foot, you can get a lethal dose pretty quick, so that's obviously why he didn't go there. That area is more radioactive than the firefighters' clothes.
Every yellow pixel here represents a banana.
Oh, wow.
Now, that might seem like a lot, but consider that in a CT scan, the patient receives about 7,000 microsieverts. That's 3 years worth of natural background radiation.
One other thing to point out is that is targeted. Radiation dose limits are actually different depending on the body part. By the way, these numbers are in millirem per year. Multiply these numbers you see by 10 to get to microsieverts, because there are 100 rem in a sievert. The number they're talking about is, that he's been referencing for public dose is TEDI at the top. Total effective dose equivalent. It's a very conservative number, which is good. You want to go for the minimum amount of dose. But there are targeted ones. They don't have a number for the chest specifically, but dose is a little different when it's targeted to a certain body part. Like you'll see the different numbers for the eye, organs, skins, extremities. And there are certain jobs that the dose could be different between one part of your body and another. So you would actually have different dosimetry, little portable detectors that you wear to measure the dose on different parts of the body if you are in a very high dose environment and going to be working there. And that'll all be part of your health physics brief before starting work.
It's been estimated that the people living around Fukushima will receive an additional 10,000 microsieverts over their lifetime due to the nuclear power disaster. For comparison, U.S. radiation workers...
I've heard that estimate before. That seems accurate. This is nowhere close to a deadly dose or an even increased cancer rate dose, though.
Limited to a maximum of 50,000 microsieverts per year.
Yep, that is the dose. So the number that is drilled into nuclear power plant workers is 5 rem, which figures out to 50,000 microsieverts. Again, 1 rem or 100 rem per sievert. I've never gotten anywhere close to this. I don't know anyone who's gotten anywhere close to this before. So, but hey, it is a limit designed to protect us. Note that on that chart I showed you earlier, it's much smaller for pregnant workers because of the increased dose that you would get to a fetus would have a not an increased dose. The dose on a fetus has more of a profound effect on the development of the child.
But that's less than another occupation, astronaut.
Yes.
An astronaut on the space station for 6 months will receive about 80,000 microsieverts worth of radiation.
Yeah, and that can vary a lot. So this number is going to get higher on a voyage to Mars, for instance. I don't actually know what the limit is, because he just said that that is the dose they receive. Don't know if there is one. I tried looking it up. I couldn't actually find what the limit is. It's possible it's a secret, or just something that, or just a risk that they accept and they need to, that they're briefed on before their mission, and they're just going to accept getting that increased dose. 100,000 is where you're going to see the increased cancer risk.
Even they are exposed to the highest levels of ionizing radiation. So can you guess who is?
Shows what I know. I thought it was astronauts. I knew like miners was lower, like including like uranium miners, it would have been under the 50,000 umbrella. Man, I don't know this.
The answer is a smoker's lungs.
Oh, okay.
Smoker's lungs on average receive
I knew you get a lot of dose from smoking. I was thinking occupation in my head.
160,000
Professional smoker.
microsieverts worth of radiation every year.
So yes, and that's increased cancer rates just from the radiation, and not to count the even more, much higher increased lung cancer risk just from smoking a cigarette. So you can get a lot of types of cancer from smoking.
Due to the radioactive polonium and radioactive lead in the tobacco that they're smoking. So not only are they exposed to carcinogens and toxins, they also receive very high levels of radiation. So it's not the people of Fukushima or Chernobyl or radiation workers or even astronauts who receive the highest doses of ionizing radiation. That honor goes to your ordinary, average smoker.
Was this entire video an anti-smoking PSA? I kind of hope it was. The banana effective dose was good. All of the context was very good. This was, Veritasium does some really good videos, and this is up there. I thought his information was fairly accurate, and I think it really just shows the picture of another reason why smoking is bad for you, and the effects now of even nuclear accidents. It's not like people are constantly getting poisoned from them right now, because again, in Chernobyl, people don't live there, and even in the Fukushima exclusion zone 8 years ago, people were getting some dose, but not a lot. Really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.